Hello, my fellow geeks and gamers, to another episode of Game Master's Banter dedicated to archetypes. I would have made an archetype episode specifically for the Scout or the Burst Blaster, but then I realized that it might be easier to file them neatly into the archetype of the dedicated one. Because after some thinking, I realized that they're not that different. They're just slightly less specialized than the dedicated one might be. You see, the dedicated one, besides being an archetype that most people do not want in their party, for reasons such as over-specialization or lack of other skills, or whatever reason there might be, the dedicated one might just be one of the most important roles, the most important archetype that I could talk about. And the reason why the Scout and the Burst Blaster fit into that, because the dedicated one dedicates. She takes one thing and does nothing else. The rogue, thief, bandit, thug could specialize towards stealth, but there will be other skills involved. The necromancer could focus completely on death magic, but will have something other than that. The dedicated one are people who are healers, specializing in healing, doing nothing but healing, and work because they do nothing but healing. And not just in combat, out of combat, for roleplay purposes, a dedicated healer can achieve so much more than just a regular off healer. Or perhaps the dedicated talker, the diplomancer, if you will. The one dedicated solely to social interaction and skill. He might not do a lot in combat, or he might do everything in combat. For instance, a person built well for talking might convince the bandits that are attacking you to drop their weapons, to consider their lifestyle choice as maybe not the best one in this situation. The dedicated one can also be a scout that runs forward, runs back, unnoticed, but noticing everything. They might be dedicated in speed, towards stealth maybe, or merely they carry around the largest spyglass, or have the best radar. Regardless, the dedicated scout is the one that's always on the front end. The Burst Blaster could also be counted into the ranks of the dedicated ones, because they are dedicated to bursting. With bursting, I mean dealing the most amount of damage using maximum resources, but not continuously. There's a difference between the burst and the sustained forms of damage, in the fact that sustained damage, because it is sustained, does less damage than a burst. This could be, for instance, in games set in medieval times, where paladins have the ability to smite the wicked, but has a limited amount of usage. The dedicated burster, the dedicated smiter in this case, would build all around utilizing that smite. That once it connects, it does a brick ton of dice in damage. Or perhaps it is the thief that manages to stab someone directly into the liver, dealing a high amount of damage. Or perhaps, and this is the one that is most obvious in its dedication, the critical hit build. It doesn't do a lot of damage, it doesn't do a lot outside of combat, it doesn't even do a lot in combat. But once it reaches the point where it can critically hit, and it does, the multipliers will keep stacking and stacking until you get builds that could kill a dragon in one hit. Or perhaps even shoot a bullet so well that it completely destroys the building the person is standing in due to the overwhelming amounts of damage that is being done. However, the reason it is burst is because high miss chances or specific things that need to happen before it can be triggered, such as the right positioning, flanking, cover in shadows, or even a once per day activation of a particular talent or skill. That is why they're burst. They cannot sustain it for, let's say, an hour. But if the conditions are right, the Burst Blaster will be dedicated to dealing the most amount of damage. And they will. No one can surpass the Burst Blaster in damage. The sustained damage dealers might reach it a few turns in. But that first, maybe the second turn, that all the conditions can be met, the Burst Blaster will deal the most amount in one go. This could also be a spellcaster that manages to launch 3, 4, maybe even 6 spells in a single turn, but then is depleted of all further resources and sticks to throwing around a magical dart or hitting people with his wizarding staff. There are many ways of building a Burst Blaster. There are many ways of building a Scout. There are many ways of building a dedicated one. And whatever you dedicate to, make sure you stick to it. Dedicated ones are experts. They're specialists. They're dedicated to their cause, whatever the reason may be for that. But if you stray from your dedication, it might not work as effective as it would be for someone who is dedicated even more than you are. There are many games, many parties, many players, even many game masters who dislike having a dedicated one in the party. Because if you have a dedicated talker and there's a secretive plot about it, some mystery, this person could, with a few rolls of the dice or a few well-placed words, figure out your entire plot, discover the fine red line, and easily take away hours and hours of preparation or even hours of game time by solving it ahead of time. The dedicated healer can be really disruptive because, hey, if the party doesn't fear death, what do they fear? The healer dying? But that's why you have attack. Or even the dedicated healer could be focused on healing himself, so that he may stay alive longer to heal the others when it is necessary. Maybe a few revival spells, a few healing powers that work on a larger scale than just one person. I have seen a few dedicated builds that dedicate towards healing and can heal 3, 4 people at the same time. And that's not even in a general area, it's sort of a chain healing ability. And this is not just in medieval settings, in modern time settings, things like this can be achieved as well. There are many games that allow for a dedicated one to be built. They just don't expect it. But think about this. Someone dedicating his life to being a fighter and having specialized so deeply into having weapon skills that will make sure that no matter what happens, he always has a weapon to draw and always has something to hit with. And hit he will. Isn't that the same as a dedication? He could easily be seen as a dedicated warrior. Or perhaps the spirit caller who is dedicated to summoning only one type of spirit, such as dedication. Whatever your dedication might be, my dedication is that of education. I hope you have learned something, and I hope you enjoyed this video. And until next time, my fellow geeks and gamers, keep rolling.